And so there'll be some sort of digital product silo that'll go, hold on a sec, there's some fucking cash to be had here. So it's not a matter of whether Google on the whole needs it. Of course,
it by division, they're like.
I mean, no company ever goes, "Nah, we're good now."
Yeah.
No, we're all right. Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. We're recording this one on the Friday, but slightly earlier in the day because me and Ian have got to be reprogrammed later, so that should be fun. What are we going to chat about? We're going to talk about... for the same reason I'm sort of getting on with it and not going to this sort of hour and a quarter stuff that we've been doing recently. Yeah, exactly. Although I'm perfectly happy to go off on a tangent, just none spring immediately to mind, except the one I just did. We're going to chat about digital economy, specifically state intervention of the digital economy. There's been a fair bit of that going on this week in Europe and the UK. We're going to chat about private networks. One of the stories I should say that I'm being particularly dictatorial about the agenda this week because Ian's been off. Mm-hmm. In fact, you're technically on holiday today, aren't you?
I am.
But you're so dedicated to the podcast and our audience.
Well, there's not a lot to do on holiday at the moment, so
no, do you know what I mean?
This is actually the most exciting part of the week.
Staycation gets a bit old. Yeah. You made chicken pie.
I did make chicken pie. Yeah.
Was that all like you made the pastry and everything?
Yeah, I made it all. Yeah.
Well played.
Yeah.
Was it yummy?
It was really good. It turned out better than I expected. You know when you're making a pie and you're kind of worried that it's all going to taste like shit
when you make
and
anything.
Claps and yeah. So yeah.
Well, surely you're just intrinsically good at cooking.
Not really. Well, right. Maybe above average.
Don't you have like cooking as part of school in France?
No.
Okay.
We have schools specifically
home
for
economics equivalent.
Do you have one lesson where you have to wear that hat?
Yeah.
That looks like a meringue. Okay, so you made a pie and then you've come in and you brought a bunch of beers. So
yeah.
There we go. Got some
that's
catching up.
Pretty much what I've done this week. Yeah.
Good skills. Okay, so that's why I'm calling the shots because you haven't done any writing and you haven't been reading light reading because you're not completely sad.
No.
Not
I glanced
it's intrinsically
at it.
sad to read light reading, I should say, Phil, etc. It's just that you've got other stuff going on in your life, although apparently not that much.
Not a huge amount, but
no. Well, that's fine. So I'm dictating basically according to what got read the most or what interested me the most in telecoms. So we've got the state intervention in the digital economy. Mary wrote a piece about German auctions selling a lot of spectrum to private networks, which on its surface may seem a little bit sort of dry and inside baseball for telecoms, although not that that's something I should apologise for. But it got loads of reads. So I was just sort of wondering why, and we'll explore that. And then we're going to finish off. We're not going to talk explicitly about China, Huawei, but we are going to talk about China. Because there's something I wrote yesterday. It's only a short little 5-6 paragraph job, but it's gone viral. Basically, if I put China and India in a headline, I mean, it kind of stands to reason. I'm creating a total available market of about 2.5 billion people.
Yeah.
And those tend to go a little bit viral. Yep. And you get some fun comments and everyone just going, this is why your country's shit and this is why my country's great, and it's all good fun. Can't beat a bit of sort of jingoism in the comments as far as I'm concerned. So, yes, state interventions in digital economy. So there's been a little cluster. Oh, yeah, sorry, mate. Oh, yeah, I've got to do the other bit. If you're watching this on the site or on YouTube or on Facebook, you can listen to it on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, which I'm going to have to sign up for within a matter of days. Yeah. And loads of other podcasting platforms.
Oh, this is better than Camden Pale, I have to say.
You're on the...
It really is.
We can't really move the cameras, but if we could...
You can raise it. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. But what the camera can't see is the 6 others that Ian's lined up. Very nice. This is a man with ambition. Yeah,
he's on vacation.
So I've got Camden Pale. Camden Pale's like a sort of watered down version of punk. I think it's similar taste, but it's weaker.
Yeah, it's really good. It really hits the spot now.
Yeah, it's great. But I just thought, seeing as we started recording like before 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I start off on some 4% rather than what's that, 5.5%?
5.4.
Yeah. So let's see how we are by the end of the pod. Let alone when we have our reprogramming.
This gives me a slight, somewhat transition to the city of the month, because it's the end of the month, which is Dallas, Texas, and they probably have no idea what we're talking about because they don't have those beers over there.
Well, I don't know. A lot of this a lot of this sort of pale ale of the kind that we have now, this Camden Pale and this punk.
It's quite American influence, isn't it?
Yeah. They're the ones who,
I mean, they know the
really
type,
sort
but
of
not the-
innovated on the hops and all that kind of shit. But yes, those particular brands, probably not. They just got Lone Star.
They drink Shiner Buck. Yeah.
Sierra Nevada and things like that.
That sort of
Not
thing.
in Texas.
No, but they'll have microbreweries. And Austin, don't forget, it's quite groovy.
Yeah.
Dallas, I don't know much about.
Where's
Dallas.
Anchor Steam from?
Anchor Steam?
Yeah.
No idea.
If you watch Bosch, the TV series, he's always drinking Anchor Steam. So
Okay.
I'm
And is he
guessing it's
Texan?
Californian. Well, it's certainly LA. It's an LA detective
Then
series.
it must
but-
be from there.
That's not Texas, is it, mate?
No, I'm just thinking about America generally, not.
Well, don't.
It's not
I think that's
Texan
offensive.
influenced.
It's offensive to generalise. Oh, by the way, talking about Americans, I hope you enjoyed Thanksgiving and ate lots of turkey, but ideally didn't put any fruit on it.
Yeah.
I think we can all agree. Cranberries
know.
and shit. No, you all right with that?
I don't mind a bit of cranberry. I know you're not into the fruit and meat.
What about
thing.
applesauce with pork?
Yeah,
Yeah,
don't like
applesauce
that.
with pork.
And I don't
I'm with you.
like mint with lamb either. There's these sort of dogmas with meats
I'm with you,
where
yeah.
you've got to slop some goo.
What
on it.
about a bit of horseradish with your beef?
I don't mind that.
That's not a fruit, though.
No, but
Yeah.
it's a sauce.
Horseradish
So-
or mustard. That's
What about
fine.
tartar sauce with your fish?
Yeah, I don't mind that either.
So you're not opposed to sauces. It's just
I think
the
it's when it gets
ones.
sweet. When it gets sweet, we got issues.
Mustard with a hot dog's okay.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Just don't be putting jam on it.
I'd
you
agree
wouldn't
with-
put
I'd
jam
agree
on
with
a
that
hot dog,
one.
would you?
I'd go along with that one. Yeah, it's taking it
There we
too
are.
far.
I rest my case. Yes. So cracking on for this week. Yeah. So Europe has come up with this plan, and the UK seems to sort of more or less followed it. I can't remember the names of these particular bills, but the long and short of it is these bills are designed to try and redress the balance of the sort of political of the digital economy. So it all comes down to basically Google, Facebook, and that lot are just owning the data economy too much. And the reason the data economy is important is that that's certainly where most advertising's gone.
Yeah.
And I'll come on to that more because there's a House of Lords thing to do with media and journalism, which overlaps with that. But everyone says data's the new crude oil, and and all that sort of thing. And basically, Yanks just own it, don't they?
They do. They have all the big tech companies, I suppose.
Yeah.
Well, it's them and the Chinese
But certainly in the West,
in the West.
we're
I
not
mean,
really handing over much data to Chinese,
we're
partly
not
because of
but
stuff we'll
they
discuss
have a lot.
in a bit.
They have a lot of people anyway, so they have enough to kind of crunch the numbers and come up with funny new AI algorithms based on the fact they've got 1.4 billion people, which is helpful.
Oh, actually, there is a tangent there that occurs to me. I read this thing. Well, there's a couple of things. Apparently, Xi Jinping has recommended that all travel is done through QR codes, which basically is his way of trying to introduce the tracing and the social credit type stuff to the West.
Right.
And he's doing it, and I'm not going to go too far down this rabbit hole, but he's doing it through the World Economic Forum, the Davos people.
You love them.
I love that, and all that Great Reset and all that shit.
Yeah.
But you watch out. This all this lockdown stuff, all this coronavirus stuff. When they start asking for health passports, i.e., they don't let you do anything unless you can prove you've been vaccinated. As far as I'm concerned, that's getting very close to the stuff that they're already trying in China.
Yeah.
So watch out for that.
What worries me is about the. I mean, this isn't too much of a tangent because it's digital. But I remember Hancock making comments in Parliament the other day, which weren't really picked up on in the media, but I found really worrying about. After this has passed, we'll have the infrastructure in place to apply this to other viruses. But not talking about something like this that might come up again with maybe a higher fatality rate, even where we'd want to perhaps use it, arguably, but applying it to things like the flu. I mean, there's a few years ago we had a particularly bad flu epidemic in the UK. I think it claimed 20 or 30,000 lives, and which is kind of half where we are with COVID. So the government could quite easily justify on that life
and the
loss.
precedent's been set.
The precedent's been set. They could say we're going to impose restrictions again. We've got the infrastructure.
And
you're going to have a health passport to travel. You're going to have this and that.
And it'll probably be just a matter of branding, because if they can rebrand it from flu to Flovid 20.
Mm-hmm. There'll be a new strain, so they will do.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry to stimulate this tension. What are you saying? Are you saying that you should be able to travel without being vaccinated?
Yes.
For flu. Well, but this is the thing is, what if it gets extended to? Well, what if it is that? What if somebody says
slope?
It's a slippery slope. What if someone says you can't travel unless you've been vaccinated for flu? Which is kind of what Hancock was alluding to. You know, he was sort of saying.
I think you should be able to travel without being vaccinated, because right now there's nothing you have to prove you've been vaccinated for in order to travel.
Yeah.
So as you say, it is slippery slope. You could make some arguments that, you know, how are we going to contain it otherwise? Although I would epidemiologically argue that you can't contain it, and therefore all these measures to curtail civil liberties in order to contain it are at best misguided and at worst sinister.
But
anyway,
the QR code thing for traveling, I mean, surely they know already where you're traveling. This is making it more official.
But maybe this would make it easy to feed into data analytics systems.
Yeah, and create a
when they scan your passport, doesn't that? Maybe it's not actually.
Yeah, but when they scan your passport, they don't see your health record.
No, I'm just saying, like.
So this is like a grand unified database type of concept, which it's all, you know, people get twitchy when they talk about ID cards, and everyone's like, well, what's the hassle? You know, it's just ID cards, just what you do to buy booze or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's when it looks like they're trying to find easier ways of joining up various databases.
Yeah.
So that they can track every aspect.
Yeah, an ID
of your
card
life.
being a sort of portal into all sorts of information about you, and it's all held by one central function rather than.
We're living in a Black Mirror episode right now.
It totally is, and the
Gotcha.
thing is, it's phones that facilitate it. All this stuff would have been inconceivable. So let's say the last time there was a sufficiently big disaster to justify a massive amount of state intervention with everyone going along with it was Second World War.
Yeah.
And that's where we got, you know, the creation of the NHS and the welfare state and all that sort of thing, which is fine. But the capacity to sort of track you electronically, the technology didn't exist in the late 40s. Now it does. And, you know, I'm aware of this. I've got a Pixel phone, which is a Google phone. I use Gmail. I use Chrome. I use so much Google stuff. I use Google Pay.
They read everything you say.
They
read your book already. Because it's on Gmail.
Oh, I've started sharing actually. You should get your. Do you use a Kindle?
Yeah.
I'll share it with you two
Little
guys.
plug. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Well, my book. I mean, I've written a fiction book, and I've used Google Drive, because then I can just pick it up wherever.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll write it on.
I imagine a lot of authors do this, but like you say, in
but
theory,
as you say, it gets a bit sinister. I don't know. Google might turn around and go, "It's ours. You got to pay us.
Yeah.
You got to give us all the money. Well, any money.
Do you want to access this file, or do you want to start from scratch?
Well, that's why I've been saving it onto a shitty old version of Word I've got on my computer the whole time.
Just print it, just to be safe.
Have it on paper, mate.
Yes. So that's relevant, and that's relevant to the sort of core topic, sort of steering it back again, because it's about the digital economy, and it's about state authorities realising quite how important it is, quite how much power you have if you have control over the digital economy. And right now, nearly all of the control of the digital economy is Google, Facebook, and, you know, Amazon, Apple, other digital giants. You know, Apple makes most of its money from gadgets, but it's a colossal digital economy giant because of iTunes and all that sort of thing.
This came up in the COVID environment as well, didn't it? Because there was this pushback to having Google and Apple team up to develop the track and trace system originally in the UK, and the reason it ended up being a bit of a disaster.
Well, so that was an example of a time where you sort of thought, okay, good, these people are bitter rivals. But they own the entire smartphone space.
Yeah.
And they are the only people who have the power to unlock certain capabilities on a phone, such as having Bluetooth on all the time. So trying to do it without them involved was just futile, which of course we tried to do because we've got this stupid man in Whitehall knows best conceit. But eventually we
also
sort of
arguably the wrong person in charge of the whole project.
Yeah, what was it, Dido?
Dido Harding, who's there because she's a crony, basically.
Exactly, she would know.
Her resume is the person who presided over TalkTalk when it had a huge data breach. She's the one person you wouldn't pick to do a security
it's almost like a piss
job.
take.
It is baffling. It's not what you know; it's who you know. It's true.
Well, completely, and I think her husband's somewhere elevated in the aristocracy as well. Or the establishment.
She's Baroness Dido Harding, isn't she now? Or something.
Well, you don't get away with a name like Dido unless you're quite posh, do you?
No. Or you're a pop star.
I mean, it's just one letter away from something quite rude.
How do you spell that?
D-I-D-O.
Oh.
Like the pop, like the
Dido,
yeah. But I was going to say like the pop star.
Late 90s.
Yeah, she used to sing those really bland sort of whispered
Well, she did
songs.
the Eminem sort of tie-in thing as well, didn't she?
Oh, did she? Was that better?
Oh my
God.
And then he raps a bit. He does it better than I do. So.
This is a highlight reel for the pod. Right, yeah, I sort of know that. But anyway, her voice was, let's say, understated.
She did stuff with Faithless as well, if you remember Faithless back in the day.
Did you do stuff with Metallica?
You know, Insomnia and all that? No.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't know, would I?
Well, it's not my scene, but at least I'm aware of it. You've got to be aware of it. It must have been to a few clubs where Insomnia was pounding away.
Ian is connected.
Don't know. It all sounds the same to me.
Keeps his finger on the pulse.
Well, this was 20 years ago.
Yeah. No, I never used to like going clubbing. It's not my.
No, neither did I. But I still went because it was an excuse to get a beer.
I never understood the social rules of clubbing.
The social rules are you go to the bar and get another pint in.
Yeah,
and then
so you might as well do that at a pub where you can actually have a chat.
Yeah, but they're closed by then. This is 20 years ago. The pubs weren't even open.
The rule is it's easier to talk to girls when you can't hear each other and you're a bit drunk.
There's that as well.
It's easier to talk to girls when you can't hear each other.
Yeah, when you can barely hear each other. It's dark.
So you talk in other ways.
So you just sort of go...
Scott.
You can barely see the flaws because they're so dark.
This is where the expression beer goggles comes in there, doesn't it? You know,
you just have whatever the sort of sign language is for get your coat. Anyway, having said we weren't going to go off on tangents, we've got off to a flyer.
So it all relates to digital, though.
It all relates to digital. So, yes, that was it, Dido. So student and that was all a waste of space. In fact, I think the government spent like 18 billion on track and trace, and no one's either been tracked or traced.
No,
it's just so hilarious. We just had that spending review from Rishi Sunak, and it's just like the borrowing. I don't think we even borrowed this much during the Second World War.
Well, this is the thing that's
what a first year for this guy, by the way.
Do you know what I mean?
But how I can't understand. I mean, this is really off tangent now. I can't understand how some of this stuff is being the tiered system, which is we were just talking about this before we came in, being basically an extension of the lockdown for most of the country. It seems. You know, and a few weeks ago, we were talking about not even having a lockdown. There was total resistance to it because it would be an economic catastrophe. And we've got the Chancellor saying it's an economic catastrophe. I mean,
he's
just
sort of saying
on.
it. We're like, well,
and the cases
Rishi.
are going down. We don't have hospitals overflowing with, you know, it's not like COVID patients are being queued up to get in. I just don't understand.
It's completely irrational, but it's irrational that everyone's doing. You know, you were talking. Was it you talking about your German mate doing all sorts of stuff in Germany?
It is the same in Germany.
Even Sweden, actually, this sort of paragon of relative libertarianism has started shitting itself and locking stuff down.
I think the good is some hospitals are overwhelmed, and so they're not very good at spreading it out.
Well, I think in the UK it's perhaps a couple in the north, isn't it, that are having problems. But from what I'm aware, this is the other thing I don't understand. There's conflicting data coming out about London, the status of London. Like you read one newspaper, it says cases are still going up in London, but actual excess deaths in London are no higher than they... there's no excess deaths basically compared with the last 5 years.
I think the data is irrelevant. I think these are entirely political decisions. I think everyone is the precautionary principle is just everywhere. Certainly in Western Europe and the US, as far as I can tell. Although the US it gets a bit more fragmented because states have more power to sort of discretionary power themselves. But certainly in Western Europe, it's just like lockdown first, ask questions later.
Yeah.
And once you set that precautionary principle precedent, then you've got to justify deviating from it. So I think, the government policy has always been, we're going to keep locking down till a vaccine comes along. So we got I do a bit of just sort of on the side share trading, just a few grand. And my shares have gone from about breaking even to about 10% up in the space of a couple of weeks just because of these vaccines. Because everyone knows that the whole world's waiting for vaccines. That's just how it is.
As long as you didn't back the AstraZeneca one.
That was a good one. Why is that bad?
Well, their share price went down, didn't it, the other day?
Oh, did it?
It's gone down quite sharply,
I
think.
I haven't watched that.
Because there's two reasons. One is that I think the 70% is less than was hoped for. But
which
also,
I think makes it more plausible, 95% indeed.
Perhaps, but there's also, if you look into the details of it, there's a likelihood the FDA won't approve it in America.
Oh.
Whereas they'll approve an mRNA one, which is completely without precedent. Whereas this one's a viral vector one, which is a technique that's been used a lot more. Anyway, I won't get into the weeds on that. No, but the point is my shares went up. It doesn't matter what, whether it was a pub chain, whether it was an oil company, whether it was Greg's,
you Greg's
whether
shares?
it's Aston Martin. Yeah, I got major holdings like £100 or something in Greg's and Aston Martin. I think my top three are Aston Martin, Apache, which is an oil company.
So you just put a load
Greg's.
of money on companies that are...
Yeah, I started doing it in April. I just thought everything's, share markets went down the toilet. I don't know anything, and I can't be bothered to do due diligence to try and be an equity analyst on it. I just thought, whose share price has gone down the toilet? I'll put a few quid on them and see and assume that they're artificially depressed, and once everything picks up. And so far...
I did Marriott and Delta, and it's like
right.
10 and 20% of each.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I've got some that are like 100% up. It's crazy.
You wish you had a bit more now.
Well, that's always the way, isn't it? So the whole economy is very contingent on that, and that's why all these lockdown things are coming on. But steering it back again, Europe and UK governments, and let's not forget in a month or so's time, those are going to be completely distinct for the first time in almost since the war. Mm-hmm. Are both saying, look, this is bullshit. And in a way, the Americans are doing it as well. There's quite a lot of antitrust stuff going on there. So this isn't even just a geopolitical or regional or sort of protectionist thing. Everyone's just saying this is bullshit. There's too much power in the hands of these digital giants, and we should do something about it. Now, I've got some sympathy with that point of view, but it's always what to do about it. Because my natural inclinations, I've said many times on this pod, are sort of quite light touch, laissez-faire, let things run their course type of thing. And so Europe's suggesting that, I mean, with Europe, it's always about harmonisation across the bloc. So they basically want data sharing and data monetisation to be easier within Europe.
Yeah.
So I characterise it in my headline as protectionism, and I grant most of my takes on Europe are perhaps biased against Europe. And I should be more professional on that, but fuck it. And yeah, it's data protectionism, and Europe is a protectionist bloc. This is why we're having these negotiations still going on. The whole point of Europe is to benefit its members to the detriment of everyone else.
Yeah. That's pretty much the same as everybody, though.
Yeah.
We all proceed on that basis.
I'm not even claiming I have a moral problem with it, but let's just call it what it is.
Yeah.
And so now they're trying to do that with data. So that was the thing I wrote up yesterday evening, and then Nick wrote up this thing today that House of Commons, this new law that's supposed to be again to sort of safeguard our data interests and to protect us against these horrible, rapacious sort of Silicon Valley guys. And then I wrote one thing, but I'll get onto that in a sec because that lends itself to another tangent. Thought I'd throw it to you. Just the general concept of state intervention in markets. So my position is that it's one thing to identify flaws in the market, it's another thing to remedy them.
Yeah.
What are your general views on sort of state intervention in markets, let's say telecoms markets specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I generally speaking, I'm for more of a light touch approach. And I don't like, this is a tangent, but it's relevant to the industry we're in. I don't like some of the interventions we're seeing in telecom recently at the moment, for instance.
Such as?
Well, I think Open RAN, which we talk about a lot on this podcast, is a classic example of this, where we now have a lobby group set up that goes around, which includes people who used to work within the US administration, who go around sort of telling governments that they should back this particular technology. And then you hear Oliver Dowden standing up in the House of Commons and specifically calling out Open RAN, and I don't think things like that are
like Oliver Dowden suddenly got keen on this technology.
And this comes back to the Rishi Sunak thing, because I think he committed some money, didn't he? There was some money put aside to diversify the sector. I mean, I think things like this are not what governments arguably should be doing.
And they got the money to spare as well.
It's a pathetic amount of money as well. I think it's 250 million, but it also includes money they want to spend on broadband rollout and stuff. Exactly. It's just not going to go anywhere. But I generally speaking, I'm for a sort of light touch regulatory approach. But I do think the reason regulators exist and the reason we have watchdogs there is because if you didn't, you'd end up with monopolies basically, and that's when I think there needs to be some intervention, and that's why we have regulators looking at merger and acquisition activity to make sure things like that aren't happening. And I think with digital, there's a real parallel actually with what happened in the kind of early 20th century, I guess, with oil, the oil industry in America, where Standard Oil got broken up because there was a perception on the government side that it was becoming too big for its own good. And I think tech is now in a kind of, we're going to have a similar situation.
It's
with
definitely an
tech.
oligopoly, isn't it?
It's an oligopoly, and the trouble for me is I kind of feel regulators are always, they don't really get it. They're behind. They're behind. They've missed things that they perhaps should have intervened in, and they don't really understand.
Look at the financial crash 2007-8. Yeah. The regulators were miles behind.
They were miles behind that. So how difficult is it for them with something like tech, which is so fast moving, and things are happening in it that even for people in tech are hard to fathom. And we have. I'm not saying regulators are stupid, and they include people from the tech industry, for instance, but it's such a fast pace of what's going on, and it's not like traditional industries where it's easier to legislate, it's perhaps easier to intervene because you can spot patterns that have happened for 50, 60 years. There's not a lot of precedent for stuff that's going on at the moment. So, deals...
and what can you do about the fact that I use Google a lot?
Yeah.
I don't pay Google a penny.
We were talking about this
except for when I buy a Pixel phone.
The other day, though, and you gave a really good example of the photos issue, which you had a bit of a chat about, where they've tied people into this photo system and provided it for free. For years and years and years. And then all of a sudden they come along and say, well, we might want to start charging for it. And it puts people in a really awkward situation. It's essentially a driving competitors out of business.
Ambush, isn't it?
It's an ambush. It is an ambush. A good word for it. Yeah.
And how much money is that going to bring in for real? Like, how much is it something they really need? Like,
well, look, you know how corporates work. There are lots of little silos. Most people are generally incentivized on increase in revenue. Look how we have it in Forma. We'll have like annual targets and whatever you've hit one year, they want you to hit 20% more next year. That's just how corporates tend to work. And so there'll be some sort of digital product silo that'll go, hold on a sec, there's some fucking cash to be had here. So it's not a matter of whether Google on the whole needs it. Of course,
it's by division. They're like,
no company ever goes, nah, we're good now.
Yeah,
no, we're all right.
They should.
We'll just put our feet up.
I don't know if the trouble is if regulators don't do something about it, who is? Because it worries me that those companies are as powerful as they are, and there's no doubt.
As I just said, they're going to keep trying to grow.
And the pandemic, to be honest with you, has been. We're talking about investing in, people like Marriott and some of the other companies that you mentioned, but. Let's be honest. This is one of the things that pisses me off about this tiering system, and they've particularly penalised the pubs.
Yeah.
If you want your high streets to survive in the future and to have anything at all that's going on in them, then you protect your pubs because that's pretty much the only thing you're going to have left. There's not going to be a Marks and Spencers. There's not going to be a John Lewis. There's not going to be any of these high street brands. They're dead. They're all gone.
But I tell you what, there's more likely to be an M&S and a John Lewis than there is a mum and pop shop.
Yeah. Or
that's the real nightmare. Is what this has done to SMEs.
Waterstones, and a whole load of other brands. They're all sort of on borrowed time. They will, and the only chance.
You mean bricks and mortar as compared to digital?
Nobody goes out shopping at the moment because they don't have to.
Yeah.
The only things that are used are grocery stores, and you can even get those delivered to your home now.
As we often do.
And. The only things that are worth saving probably are places where people actually go to meet to chat like we're doing now, which
is the one thing
which
that's
are
not allowed,
food and drinks places, which is the one thing they're not allowing, which is
to spend money. Really.
Yeah,
I got told off in a story for referring to coronavirus as a cold.
Did you?
Someone's going, people are dying. It's not a fucking laughing matter.
It is related to the cold.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, I was being facetious, and he just didn't dig it.
But I just think that it scares me that they have so much power over us. They've weighed into a lot of other sectors, and they're dominant in some of those sectors. You look at Amazon in retail. You look at the effect of them on the telecom sector. What's happening at the moment, which again we've talked about a few times recently, with people moving telecom functions into the public cloud, and they're all powerful companies across a whole range of industries. They've been able to become even more powerful during the pandemic. It's pretty hard to
all their share prices have gone through the roof.
Nobody gets through a day without using those services to some extent, and it's hard to think of a parallel. I think in history where we've been in a situation like that, and I think it's quite scary.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I don't know if you saw the Trump made a 1 minute press conference.
Did he?
About the Dow Jones. Dow Jones, sorry, beating 30,000.
Yeah.
And then he was like, "This is great," and then he just left. But then there's like thousands of cars, like actually. Speaking about Dallas, in Texas, people queuing for food banks. But then, the Dow is up. It's like a different,
I know, and it's
disconnected world.
All the stock markets is speculators betting on the future anyway.
Yeah.
So, it's typical of Trump to try and claim that somehow says something more profound than it actually does.
Yeah.
It's not that much in the future. I mean, the market bets like 3 months ahead, 6 months maybe. And in 6 months, people won't be queuing for food banks? I don't know.
Well, they're betting. Judging by my meager little portfolio, they're just betting on the vaccines.
Yeah.
If everyone takes the vaccine, then we can more or less get back to business as usual, and there'll be a hell of a lot of pent up demand.
This vaccine rollout's not going to be anywhere near as smooth as they think it's going to be. I mean, look at the faff that there's been in the UK this year since March, when they said they were going to have testing. Everywhere, you'd be able to go and get a test efficiently, and this system would work really well. And we're in December now, nearly, and it still doesn't work very well. It's still not very efficient.
Yeah.
This vaccine rollout, I can see being a real fiasco, actually, and we don't even know yet. I mean,
most people don't need to take it. I mean, even I.
Well, this is true.
Even I, knocking on 50, I'm not especially vulnerable.
Yeah.
And my kids,
but
I've never been worried about them at all.
The good thing about the vaccine, it cannot be worse than where we're at right now. Anyway.
Well, I'm not saying it's not good news. I mean, it is good news. But
you say it can't be worse. I don't think I've caught the Rona yet. Or if I have, I've been completely asymptomatic. What if the vaccine gives you a fucking nasty dose of it? That's how it could be worse.
I mean, you always get like a bit sick when you get a vaccine, but then it's over.
Well, not necessarily.
Well, this one's supposed to be pretty brutal, apparently. I mean, I'm not sure how it's going to go down with 85-year-olds if it's as bad as some of the test subjects said it is.
Really?
Well, quite.
I don't know. I'm not an expert on vaccines, but can they make you so ill that you'd actually be worse off with a vaccine if you're in a pretty vulnerable position anyway? That's one question.
Well, the point is, we don't know. And if it gets to the point, this is back to the thing about like health passports and that sort of thing. If we get back to the point where there's tacit coercion towards taking this thing, which has been rushed, not to say that the scientists doing it haven't followed scientific best practice. But normally vaccines take 5 to 10 years, and this shit's been done less than a year.
Scientific best practice, though. I mean, the AstraZeneca thing. I don't know if you read the details of this, but there were two studies, weren't there? And one they gave them a small dose at first, and then a bigger one later, and that turned out to be more effective. But it was an accident; they didn't mean to do that.
Big dose, yeah.
So,
this is how most of medicine has happened: just accidents.
Yeah, but
serendipitous.
But it might be serendipitous, but it was an accident in the process.
Do they know what they're doing?
And you think, well, if it's been rushed through this quickly, it wasn't meant to happen. So if that wasn't meant to happen, then what other things weren't meant to happen?
Are they going to have another one where they go, we gave him a dose and then kicked him up the arse, and that got a higher incident. It's all just random. And then we gave another lot of dose and made him eat 10 donuts, and that did well.
Yeah. I'd hasten to add, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I don't want to sort of point out, but because you don't want to be called an anti-vaxxer, but although I think other people are getting sort of grouped in and lumped together as anti. Apparently, there's a lot of people who would be classed as anti-vaxxers in the UK, though. Now I don't know what polls are showing at the moment. But there's a huge section who wouldn't want to take it.
What, or even just querying it, or even just going, hold on a sec.
Yeah.
Well, people just throw around epithets so liberally now. It's just
there is that slight feeling where you're like, I'm going to wait for my friend to get it.
Yeah.
And see how he does.
So my feeling...
Which is wrong, but,
Well, it's not wrong.
No, it's not wrong, but it's like it's not helping the cause.
That's my feeling. I think... I certainly wouldn't touch it unless it had been in the wild for at least 3 months.
Yeah.
You won't be able
Scott,
to...
you don't have to worry about it because they're going to test it. They're going to test it on 80-year-olds first.
But I mean, that's
and if they survive...
Exactly. Then you'll
be all right. If they die, then it's... We don't know anyway because they might have done because they're 80.
It's the old medieval witch test, isn't it? You go, oh no, it turns out it's bollocks. But then there's no old people left. So we've kind of solved the problem anyway. Okay. So yes, those are those. So we've done that state intervention. So I've got one other thing because I better steer it. The House of Lords has recommended that basically we follow a similar idea.
What's the House of Lords, by the way?
So
it's a bit like the Senate, isn't it?
I guess so, yeah. So we've got the House of Commons where all the MPs are and they shout at each other and that sort of thing. And the House of Lords is supposed to be a sort of another chamber that checks them. Okay. So, like back in the day, it used to be quite significant.
It used to be more powerful than it is, but they watered down its power. So they can veto things, but only for a limited period of time. Yeah. They can recommend changes to proposed laws and things like that, basically.
So it's supposed to be a check on the House of Commons, which is the main executive. But as Ian said, it's over the years. You can imagine, like 200 years ago, Lords are the only people who had a fucking vote anyway.
Yeah.
So it's become more and more diminished, and now there's less hereditary peers, i.e., people who got their title from their birth.
They could veto anything. I think until 1910. Until 1910 they could basically just block anything they wanted, which is pretty dramatic because it means you couldn't get through any kind of controversial reforms at all. So things like the women's vote and stuff like that. They could.
It's funny. I'm learning a lot about all this stuff watching The Crown on Netflix.
Right, I bet.
It's really good.
Yeah, I haven't watched it. But,
you learn. I mean, you learn so much about.
I've heard it's good.
British,
I haven't seen it.
Because it's not only about the monarchy. It's about prime ministers and stuff.
I'd like to. Actually, I should make a point of learning more about how the French do things, because I mean, everything that happened post French Revolution is a real sort of case study in civics and how to sort of try and create a country from scratch almost.
Republics,
and all that. So yes, as Lords are gone, why don't we try this thing that the Aussies are doing, which is forcing social media platforms or internet platforms like Google and Facebook to pay every time someone puts up a story from a newspaper. Mm-hmm. So this is supposed to be a remedy for how fucked the journalistic profession is because of the internet. So before the internet, you get lots of money from ad sales, you get lots of money from cover price, all this sort of stuff. And the internet's come along and all that wedge has gone over to Facebook and Google. And they're trying to work out how they can sort of redress that balance. And their bright idea is to make them pay some money.
Just like a copyright thing.
Yeah, pretty much.
Hey, you use my article, pay me.
Yeah, because they're saying that you make money off the back of those articles appearing on your platform, so you should share some of that money.
Right. Yeah, but people go on your article thanks to the platform.
Well, quite. That's a really good point. So
sounds like the net neutrality argument almost. One aspect of it years ago when there was a suggestion that web companies should pay the operators because they use their pipe sort of thing.
Yeah.
But they sort of ignore the fact that it's a kind of symbiotic relationship, really. It's people wouldn't use the pipes in the first place if there wasn't decent content.
Well, and are they using it, or is it the end user that's using it and just happens to be consuming
consuming content?
Then Facebook is going to start to charge its people, being like, you want to share this article, you have to pay $1.
Yeah.
Well, no,
exactly.
More realistically, so this is what they said in Australia. Facebook said, you try that, we'll just stop letting people share shit.
Exactly.
It makes it negligible. Most of the traffic Facebook gets is probably just from people sharing pictures of their kids or from just...
I don't know if that's still true nowadays. At the beginning it was.
Or putting up, let's say it's political stuff, but you don't have to share an article. I could just put a thing up saying Trump was robbed. That doesn't require me sharing a, whoever's still saying that, Breitbart story or something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, their point, I don't even know if they're bluffing, but their point is we don't even make that much money from it. So fuck it. We'll just drop it. We just stop letting people share this stuff.
What it's used for nowadays is to rig elections, isn't it, apparently?
Well, according to the discredited journalist Carol Cadwell, but there we go.
She's not had a good week, has she?
She's not. She's rubbish. So basically, Facebook threatened to call their bluff in Australia.
Yeah.
And well, they might. Mm-hmm. And this is the problem. To go full circle back and maybe wrap it up, because we've gone off so many tangents, I can't sort of get into the whole how to sort out journalism thing, which would have been a fun bit of navel-gazing for us to do.
Yeah.
Because you do know the answer.
Yeah. Just give me lots of money, basically.
The House of Lords was saying a similar thing.
So they're saying, let's do that.
Right.
And so I think
fees for these companies.
Yeah.
Sort of
and so I think they're wrong on several levels. Firstly, it's a great point that Pierre made, which is that this doesn't so much apply to Telecoms.com and light reading, I don't think. But let's say it did. Let's say a hell of a lot of light reading's traffic came from people sharing it on social media. Mm-hmm. well, if now you're constraining that sharing of social media, that's actually detrimental to light reading, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our traffic did at one point, I don't know if it still is, come from LinkedIn, and I think we still get a fair amount.
Well, there we are.
LinkedIn,
So imagine they said, right now, LinkedIn's got to pay every time. LinkedIn's got to pay you every time someone puts up a thing. So LinkedIn would just went, fuck it, then we won't let them put it up.
Yeah.
Then it actually harms you, doesn't it?
Of course, yeah. And I think everybody's delighted that LinkedIn's a good avenue for traffic. It's not the, it depends on the model of the publication, doesn't it, really?
Yeah.
So
no, and things can go viral. People can share stuff.
Eyeballs is more advertising revenue. So
and it stands to reason that business journalism like we do would do better on LinkedIn.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's one reason why it's not going to work. And linked to that is the thing that the platforms can just not play ball.
I mean, this is a classic case of state intervention that's unwelcome, to be honest with you.
Well, it's the problem. The real essential problem with it is, this is getting into my sort of more purist free marketeer thing, is the law of unintended consequences.
Yeah.
So state can intervene and go, we don't like. It's like whack-a-mole.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, we don't like that, so we're going to stamp on that, and then this thing comes up over here, and they go, okay, so we'll stamp on that. And, a smart organisation like Google or Facebook can always just go, well, if you do that, then we're just going to adapt.
Yeah.
They're like a blob of plasticine. They'll just adapt around it.
Yeah.
And you could say, well, that's not nice, is it? And they go, well, whatever. We're worried about our shareholders, not whether you think we're nice or not.
Yeah.
So those are all reasons why the sort of state intervention is bad. But that's not to say that I don't acknowledge that the system's broken. One of the reasons the quality of journalism is so bad is because so much money has been taken out of it. So you've got fewer journalists having to produce more content, having to be more clickbaity, and create these sort of echo chambers and all that sort of thing.
Even like respectable newspapers now, they
look at the States. I mean, everyone's gone mad in the States when it comes to news and journalism.
The worst one here, I find, is the Daily Express.
Yeah,
which I don't go out to look for the Daily Express, but you sometimes look for something that you might be interested in, you just key in it, and it's obviously not something specific to telecom, it might be a sports thing, and you just key in the sort of Blackburn Rovers or Novak Djokovic, and a Daily Express headline will come up that's Novak Djokovic rattles his fiercest competitors with this revelation, and you click on it and it's like he's going to take a few weeks off next year because he doesn't feel like doing the Australian Open.
It's awful,
and it's like they do it again and again and again, and the stories are always like 50 words long. You won't believe what he's just told his.
I know, it's awful, and I've always hoped that when the headline doesn't match the body copy, sooner or later you turn your readers off.
Yeah.
We will write. I think I'm not a bad headline writer, and I'll sometimes spice things up a little bit in the headline. But I don't think I ever don't represent what's in the body copy.
Yeah.
Maybe the worst I'll do is oversell it a little bit. And I think that if you keep just lying to your readers, surely they're going to turn off. Anyway, so just to draw a line on the journalism thing and then move it on. The other reason it's bad is a lot of journalism is already adapting to the subscriber model. So the ad funded model is probably broken. So what we do as business press, we're not really ad funded as such. We're more sort of bespoke advertising. So, we'll get specific companies engage with us in order to access our quite curated bespoke audience. And so that's different to a broad brush sort of newspaper or TV channel or something like that. But increasingly, you've got like a lot of the Murdoch press, Wall Street Journal, the Times, going behind a paywall.
Yeah.
New York Times has got sort of thinner paywall. There's a lot of paywall stuff going on. And that paywall stuff does still rely on people sharing shit on the internet, because then they come there. Let's say Wall Street Journal's like example, the FT, business press. You're like, okay, they've got an exclusive. They got a scoop. They found out this thing, like the thing I'll come on to probably briefly, about Fox Apple moving some of its manufacturing to Vietnam. Was I think an FT scoop. And so you see that, and then that generates demand. You're like, damn, I can't get past the paywall. I really want to read this. Maybe I'll subscribe. So that's why it's self-defeating as well. Mm-hmm. Okay, I better move along. We'll keep these two segments short and sweet, Ian.
How long have we got? Have we really gone on for a long time on that one?
Yeah, it's 45 minutes.
Jesus.
Almost. Yeah.
Must be the brewdog.
We've basically got 15, 20 minutes left. So, private networks. I'm going to hand the ball to you, as I've done a lot of the rabbiting. So, private networks, we wrote this story on Telecoms.com and got loads of reads, and I was thinking, why? And I assumed it's because there's people in the industry wondering if private networks is where some of the cash from 5G might come from.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to throw it to you and just like, what do you think of private networks? Do you think that's probably one of the better 5G commercial opportunities?
Well, I think the industry thinks that, yeah. And I think it's always that the hope with 5G, I think, originally was that it was more of an enterprise business application, I guess, than a consumer one, and private ties in with that because it's all about serving very specific industrial market needs by building out networks that are only going to be used by those organisations, and they're essentially not a part of the main consumer network. Bespoke stuff, and you can do it in lots of different ways. But look, there's no growth in consumer with 5G. Let's be honest. And perhaps that might change. I'm not optimistic based on what the previous generations have done.
You can bang on about AR, VR, and all that sort of thing.
Exactly. I mean, some people might make money from it, but the telecom industry itself won't make a lot of money. The handset manufacturers might. The operators, equipment makers, maybe a bit more, but nobody's really going to make a lot of money from selling higher speed, lower latency.
Well, we've seen that with the tariffs.
Consumers.
Hardly anyone charges a premium for the tariffs.
The interesting thing is there's been a bit of a shift actually on the vendor side recently, I've noticed, with Ericsson in particular, which for a long time has had a strategy of recovery. I think let's focus on getting our business in order. Let's be the best we can be at 5G and build market share there, and then we can the margins are going to recover on that basis. Let's sell off some other stuff. Let's downsize.
Yeah,
they've gone through that process now, and all of a sudden they're starting to talk about growth, which they haven't talked about since Vestberg was there.
Yeah,
and where are they looking for growth? They're not looking to the telecom market, the operators. They're not very optimistic. There's much growth there at all outside China. I don't think it's just pretty flat. Where they're looking is the enterprise sector. They made this acquisition of a company called Cradlepoint, which I think they're spending about $1 billion on that, which does a lot of emergency response stuff, as I understand it, in the US. So kitting out ambulances and things like that, and providing sort of essentially local area services in that kind of context. And they're hoping they could use that technology to go and address opportunities in Europe that aren't consumer at all. They're business
and also,
opportunities.
On the operator side, I was chatting to Vodafone, someone who will be not unfamiliar to long-time
Did he phone you this morning as well?
No, I chatted to him yesterday actually. But we were talking more generally, and he was pointing out that this is Jamie, obviously, that a lot of Vodafone, while it's obviously no less committed to its core stuff, this was in the context of a little IoT announcement they had. Yeah. And there's some other announcement which I
was vaguely aware of that one because I
think it was embargo bomb, so I better not let that slip. But basically, they're into diversifying. So, both on the vendor side and the operator side, there is this diversification from just connectivity, because, as you rightly say, merely widening the pipe, there's no cash in it.
Yeah, and Nokia's the same. I mean, Nokia's only growing bit over the last sort of year or so has been its enterprise business, and it's up. And because they split that out, which Ericsson doesn't do, you can actually see what's been going on, and it's double-digit growth on the enterprise side, pushing into adjacent markets, and a lot of that's private wireless networks. That's where a lot of it's come from. And I remember talking to people there a few months ago, and the guy, he spelt it out fairly. In fairly blunt terms, he was saying if you put another base station in all these factories around the world, it's like several million extra base stations that we can sell. Just that alone.
And why
that's
would you
not even to say anything about the applications and all the other stuff that you can do with enterprise.
Remind our audience why you'd want to stick a base station in a factory.
So some of these companies basically want a kind of dedicated service that they can make use of, and 5G appeals over things that might have been used up to this point, like Wi-Fi or some wired technologies perhaps, or 4G.
And what are the use cases? Is it like a sort of IoT
Yeah, because they think they can do things with. I think it's partly because they think it opens the door to new applications that you can't do with some of these older technologies. So when we talk about a lot of the stuff we discussed to do with low latency, needing sub 10 millisecond connections, which you need for things like robotics and stuff that actually might get used in a factory environment. I mean, I'm much more
autonomous vehicles.
I'm much more optimistic about that.
About the place.
Yeah, I'm much more optimistic about that, and I see a much bigger need for that sort of thing in that environment than I do in the sort of wider consumer market. And you can certainly see why companies will want to pay for that. You look at Tesla's robot factory in California, and I'm pretty sure those guys would have been talking to, operate vendors about 5G technology and what they can get out of it. And, partly it's about getting rid of wiring. That sounds really basic, just getting rid of basic cabling in factories.
It opens up all. I mean, that's why we've got our jobs. Wireless is a big deal.
And partly it's the security levels that you haven't had with sort of Wi-Fi systems in the past. It's we talk about things like network slicing. Now, it remains to be seen because a lot of this stuff hasn't been used until now. But the promise with 5G is that you can sort of carve one network up into lots of different little segments or slices, and attach kind of service level agreements to each of those.
So we guarantee a
100 megabit per second service.
6 nines and
6 nines, and it's much easier to do because of the higher performance capabilities combined with virtualization. It's much easier to do that on a 5G system.
So if you know that you've got a network
one.
slice where the SLA says 6 nines, which means 99.9, etc. Reliability, then you just know that your little robots and your little drones and your little connected sensors are going to be cool.
Yeah, and I can see that entirely. It remains to be seen because it hasn't really we haven't really seen it in practice yet. I don't think. But you can definitely understand why people are talking about 5G in the enterprise context and private wireless being a big chunk of that as something that's really important. I think the interesting thing about it is where, in the industry itself, who makes the money out of this? I mean, certainly the vendors themselves have a big, massive opportunity there. Whether the operators are going to do very well out of this is another question.
That's the tightrope they're walking. Like whenever Ericsson or whoever comes out with this, we've got our own sort of IoT or private network offering that you verticals, because they've all got their little vertical industry divisions, haven't they?
Yeah.
And each time they do that, they look like they're circumventing their primary customers, which must be awkward.
Yeah, so Nokia and Ericsson, which are the big two, because I think for Huawei, it's going to be increasingly difficult to try and sell into that enterprise market nowadays outside China. Yeah. So if you look at the big two traditional vendors as Ericsson and Nokia, they have very different strategies for targeting that enterprise market. Nokia has has a very distinct enterprise business, and they are quite happy to just go and work directly with enterprises and sell to them and have a channel to market to enterprises and not necessarily. They say they prefer to work with telcos, but they will just go and work directly with BMW, for instance. Whereas Ericsson has had this sort of insistence on not doing that. They say it's always important to have a service provider as a channel to market and a partner. And their reason for that is
sitting on the fence a bit, aren't they?
Yeah, well, I think they've been quite outspoken about it. They say the reason they're doing that is they don't want to compete against their own customers, because there are instances where operators and vendors want to sell the same kind of things to a customer.
You can't get too cocky,
and you've got to be careful about whose toes you're treading on. So it's a difficult one because, on the one hand, if Ericsson says it's not going to work with telcos, what do you do then about some German companies, for instance, where there's been these spectrum auctions, and you guys are writing about that this week.
I've got loads of reads this week.
What do you do about some of these big German conglomerates that have gone out and bought their own spectrum and decided that they don't really want to have an operator involved? And there are some cases where, one reason for getting your own spectrum, because once you own spectrum and once you have a vendor involved who can do a lot of the services stuff anyway with managed services, and they have all the technology expertise, the question is, why do you really need to have a telecoms operator there in the first place? Yes. And why would you go out and get the spectrum if you weren't trying to cut out the telecom operator?
So I'm going to push it along for the aforementioned reasons of utter lack of discipline in the earlier segment. What you seem to be saying is there is money in private networks, but maybe not for operators.
Yeah, exactly. That sums it up pretty well.
Cool. Fair enough. We should just do that. Be like a one minute podcast. And then on to the final thing. So we just sort of, there was a slight sort of segue earlier that I could have grasped about China. So, I just wrote up a story. It's often the stories that I've spent less time on. This is one of my, I've got an hour to write something before I'm sending a newsletter once. And I just
everybody loves it.
Yeah, and everyone just laps it up.
You work better under pressure.
And yet ones I'll take like 3 or 4 hours over, no one fucking reads it.
Yeah, ones I take weeks over, no one reads.
And this one was basically conflating two only barely related stories, China being the common denominator. One was that India keeps banning Chinese apps. This is the third tranche, taking it up to, I think, 220 apps in total.
Right.
They've banned. And there's a lot of niggle between India and China at the moment. They've got this border stuff going on where they start clubbing each other like something out of fucking Walking Dead. Honestly, there were like baseball bats with barbed wire wrapped around them. They started
made up,
started lamping each other.
Anything so people would still die, but it wouldn't be an act of war, basically.
Yeah, they just weren't shooting each other. Anyway, that's just this little bit of sort of Himalayan aggro that they've got. And anyway, so India's sort of upping its hostility towards China and banning all these apps. And then there was just another thing, which was actually it was Reuters, not FT. I said it was FT earlier. It wasn't. It was Reuters, who don't have a paywall. So it completely contradicted my argument there. Anyway,
what's their model? Then, just out of interest.
Theirs is just there you go.
Just ads.
Just here it is. Yeah. I mean, I presume that there's quite a lot of affiliate stuff where people republish. I think them, Press Association, people like that. There's a lot of republishing.
Syndication,
that sort of thing. But also just their reputation. Thomson Reuters
they're pretty good.
It was that, and this was just one of those one anonymous source things, which could be bollocks.
Yeah.
I always take the piss, but then I still report on it. So I'm a bit of a hypocrite. And their source said that Apple went and had a word with Foxconn.
Was there any one?
I think it was in this case.
Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein would be. Well, they wouldn't be turning in their grave because they're both still alive. But.
Yes, but their journalistic grave, given that they just write partisan shites now.
Shots fired.
Oh yeah, there you go. Suck on that, Woodward and Bernstein. Call yourself journalists.
What do they know?
Yeah, exactly. I do Watergate every day now. I do Watergate before I get up. They got this source saying that Apple's had a word with Foxconn, which is the biggest electronics manufacturer in the world, Taiwanese company, but a lot of their manufacturing is based in China, Shenzhen, all that stuff. And they've just gone, look, Foxconn, can you move a bunch of it to Vietnam, please? The apparent reason being...
That was the email.
Yeah, just, move it to Nam so we can get flashbacks. The apparent reason being that they don't like the way things are going with the US-China trade war.
Yeah.
And so there's two interesting things about that. I think Apple's right. I mean, the most amazing thing actually is how restrained China's been. And they haven't just gone for a tit for tat, fuck it then, you're going to victimise Huawei, we'll victimise Apple, which would be the obvious target, maybe Qualcomm. But one of those big sort of mobile phone players.
I think this whole move out of... So it's out of China they've moved, out of India.
Well, that's what the Reuters report said.
This move away from Chinese, China as a sort of manufacturing hub, and in telecoms specifically, people have used China to assemble things. Really, actually, that's what Ericsson and Nokia have sort of had facilities there for. It's
but like all the iPhone is made in China.
Yeah, so
I mean, it's quite high level assembly.
It's high.
Is it? I don't know.
It's high level assembly, but it's not stuff you can't do elsewhere.
Oh yes,
and certainly with automation as well. I mean, so bringing up Ericsson again, because I've talked to them quite a bit about this, about where they have their different manufacturing hubs and where they have their assembly hubs. And they now have a few. They opened one in America actually a couple of years ago, which is highly automated.
Yes,
I think they have about 100
one
people working there. Yeah, and it can serve the whole North American market.
One bloke there with an iPad.
And this is clearly, I mean, not clearly, but partly a response, I think, to the whole Trump. We'd rather have stuff that's going to be, sold in the US market, made in the US market. I think there was that gave a lot of impetus to the move to have this kind of facility in Texas that they have now. But you also see Vietnam. I mean, I think Samsung uses Vietnam heavily.
Yeah, Vietnam's been a good manufacturing place for a while.
Have made the same move actually.
Yeah. But maybe it's accelerating.
And I think with geopolitics, and it's not just geopolitics, it's also rising cost of labour in China. It's not the low cost market that it used to be, whereas Southeast Asian markets are. This is a big trend, I think. So Vietnam is now becoming like the place to get your low cost assembly stuff done.
And you're completely right. I mean, China's USP for a long time has been exporting wage deflation.
Yeah.
Like, why don't make it in England? You can get it made in China at a fraction of the cost because we pay our factory workers fuck all.
Yeah.
And it's inevitable when that happens, even in a country as populous and massive as China, that eventually those factory workers are going to have class aspirations and want to earn more money and want to have nice houses. And
all the kids become rocket scientists and
that sort of thing. All that sort of thing. So what do? Do you just draft in more people from the hinterland, from the paddy fields, and pay them fuck all, or do you pay the people who are now more educated and more enlightened and more clued up more money? That's always going to be a problem for them.
They've also moved some manufacturing in India, I think, so that they can it kind of allowed them to open Apple stores, I think. Like, it was a law, like you have to make some stuff in the country so you can open stores.
Yeah.
It was huge for them, obviously.
And I don't think you have anything like the rapidly growing middle class in India that you do in China. I mean, obviously, there's plenty of rich Indians. There's that bloke who just chipped in to buy OneWeb with the UK government. Oh God, don't get me started on that. I should have brought that one up earlier.
That's a good state intervention one.
Yeah. And he's not short of a bob.
That's a bit of a white elephant, isn't it? That one.
It's just ridiculous. But I actually think that I don't know this, but my gut feel is that there's now a greater sort of imbalance of wealth in India than there is in China. There's a bigger middle class in China than in India. Yeah. But the Indian demographic situation will start evolving in that direction. Anyway, so both those things are interesting. And then talking about India, the other funny thing, and we better wrap it up there, whenever I bring up sort of geopolitical stuff, which, I grant sometimes it's the telecoms relevance is a bit more tenuous than other times, people just get involved in the jingoism, as we were talking about at the start, and it's such fun to watch because I moderate all the comments.
Yeah.
And as long as people aren't being incredibly obscene or incredibly abusive or just trollish for the sake of being trollish without adding any value at all, I always let the stuff through. And people pile in. And I tell you what, the India versus China stuff, there's real lobbing grenades. There's
potential for a full-on war there.
Lobbing grenades over the Himalayas there. Well, this is just cultural.
Yeah.
But there's obviously no love lost there.
No.
I haven't spent enough time in that part of the world to really understand what the dynamics are. But these are the two most populous countries in the world. They will have their own national egos that go along with it. You've got things like Tibet and Nepal and all this stuff on the Himalayan border where there's been aggro forever.
Yeah.
And then we've got these people clubbing each other on that bit of direct border that they have. I don't know. It's going to be an interesting one. But the biggest thing I take from it all is just the evidence of, and we've spoken about this before, the evidence of China running out of allies. I was talking to my dad the other day. He said China's even started giving dirty looks to those bits in Risk up in Kamchatka and all that, all those bits of Siberia where they borders China. It started giving them looks.
Yeah. It's like Britain in the late 1700s.
Right.
No allies.
Right, and just messing with everyone. And, one of the few, I don't know if Russia's an ally, but Russia quite likes...
Well, Russia and China are quite close.
Yeah, and Putin quite likes anyone who messes with the West.
Yes, he does.
I think they look like they're sitting back and enjoying the show, though.
Yeah.
On either side.
But that's the point. If China's even started messing with Russia up in that bit close to Alaska, then that's... I don't know. I think who's on their side?
And wasn't there in India thing, like the Indian... president?
I think that'd be an ideal scenario, actually. Russia and China go to war.
Well, we'd rather not have any wars.
We'd rather not have any wars, but if there's going to be one,
well, I actually think
Russia and China, massive distraction from countries that actually want to govern themselves properly.
No offense to Russia, but it would be a quick, swift thing if China has.
I don't know. Russia might have more nukes. But hopefully it definitely wouldn't come to that.
If we go with nukes, well then, yeah.
Well, this is one of the reasons why these countries don't go to war. Mutually assured destruction and all that.
I think the Chinese army is more robust, though.
Well, there's certainly more of them.
Yeah.
But no, I don't think we want any wars, but
I'm serious. I don't want them to go to war. I'm just...
No, I know. Don't worry, I wasn't getting all sanctimonious. No, man.
Imagine how much your iPhone would be after this. Oh, devastating.
I look at my stock portfolio. Look, I've just got 50 quid more. I'm all for this war. But I think there's something, maybe if China gets isolated more, then Xi Jinping might get back in his box a little bit.
Yeah.
The flip side is he could be a corner tiger and just go mental. But maybe if he realises he hasn't really got any allies and that he's kind of stuck his neck out too far, maybe he'll wind it in. Who knows? All right, talking about winding your neck in, we'd better wind our neck in and go off and do our thing. We've got like 4 minutes to get ready. So thanks a lot for listening, and make sure you join us for the next one.